Okay, welcome to the next episode. So in this one, we're going to be doing some really cool stuff. We're going to be going and we're going to be setting up the object factories, but they're not just going to be the factories. They're also going to be the cache for really any kind of object we want to recycle. The object factories will be able to go and take in pretty much any object type and cache it up and provide new copies of it when it needs to make new ones, or provide an already used copy that has been marked for reuse later. Or if it's something that we've gone and specifically said we want certain things to happen when it's recycled or when we create a new one, we want specific behavior around that, then we can actually go and put a decorator on something and configure a factory for that type of thing so that we can then go and have it automatically call the methods in that factory when we do clean for reuse or create new in that situation. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and set up the object factory class, and this is the class that we will extend to make a factory object. This handles the cleaning and the creating a new object, but doesn't really do anything else. So in here, what you see here is I've got the not implemented in both of these. This is just so that we can get a fail case, because one of these tests, a couple of these tests actually, are going to automatically pass right away when we change this. So what we want to do is we want to go here and we're going to change it to this throw new factory test object tester clean for use called. And what that is I just made an exception. I made two special exceptions for us that do these two types of exception so that we can tell, hey, was this function called or was this function called? Because what we want to do, for reasons I'll probably go into in more detail later, we want to be able to either go and call out the factory object with a specific thing. We want to be able to call out the factory object using a generic so that we can throw in a type directly there. But in some cases, that won't necessarily be something that's available to us. We may not be able to specify the type, and we don't really want to do weird stuff inside of reflection to go and call a dynamic type from there automatically. So what we're going to do is instead we're just going to make a base class that will return an anonymous object. It won't really care what the object is. It just says, hey, I'm returning an object and I don't care what it is. What we want to do is we want to make that a base class that really just reflects into the other one. So you can see that here, object clean for reuse. So when we call this here, and we can see it here, we just want that to go and call this directly here. So that'll just call this clean for reuse, which is why you see that here. And you only see clean for reuse and create new here, which will make more sense when I show you the skeleton that I've created for us to start coding in with this. The other thing that you need to know is here, what we're doing is we're setting up our factories. This is the same in pretty much all of them, just so that we have a factory object that we can call the methods on. And then we're going and we're saying assert throws, and then we're saying what exception we want the call to return. So here we see fact object create new, and we're going to go ahead and expect that. So if everything goes well from that, we should then come up here and we should see this get called here, this create new. Right now, two of these tests are going to immediately return just because we're calling them directly, but that's this clean for reuse and this clean test here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to uncomment that, and we're going to comment out our not implemented. We're going to comment that out too. And actually, let's just go ahead and delete those two. Okay, now we save that, come down here, go over here and hit run tests. Now, as you can see, those two passed like I said they would, because, well, they're really simple. They're just calling it directly, right? The tricky part here is we do not want to change this. This is our test. Do not change this test, okay? We don't want to change this test to reflect it. What we want to do is we want to come over here and go into our solution, and I've created an object factory here. So if you're downloading the source code, and the starting source code for this lesson, I'm going to be putting a link down in the doobly-doo. That's going to include the tests as well as the blank skeletons that I'm starting with for the factory attribute, and the object factory, as well as all the old code from last episode. Now in here, we have again two not implemented here. So when we look at this, that's what we're getting, right? We're getting, yep, not implemented. So what do we want to do? We can't go and just throw that back because that exception doesn't exist yet, right? It doesn't exist in that sphere. But we wouldn't want it to do that anyways, because we would want it to be a little bit different so that it's going to throw separate ones. And actually, we might want to, for proper testing, let's go ahead and duplicate, well, really, all of this. Duplicate all of that one more time. And we're going to go 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And we're just going to put 2 on the end of all of this so that all of it is just a second copy of it. So there, now we've got a second instance of all of the test objects, right? But they are now a completely different exception, right? So we should be able to call either one and get the right result no matter what. So we're just going to go and copy each of these lines, and we're just going to add 2 to it. 2, 2, and let's see. Okay, there we go. So I've gone and I've set up each one of these to have 2 calls. So we have one call to the regular one and then one to our duplicate here. That way there's no possible way that you could do this the wrong way. You can't make it go and return one and then the other in the factory object, because you can't just go and call out to it like we could at that point. So that was an issue with our test. So now this is changed. So unfortunately, because of the fact that I've already pushed this up to Git as it was before, you're gonna have to go and make these changes yourself. But oh well, that's how it goes sometimes, right? So let's go ahead and see what we have now. We're gonna go here and we're gonna run all. We should see the same result. Yeah, okay, we do see the same result. We're all good there. And this is still airing out for the same reason. Yep, not input. So we come over here to our factory object. Now, really, what we need to do is set it up like this. So what I did is I set up an abstract class, right? And then this is the base. This has our object create and object clean, which just gets an object, returns an object, and has an object, right? And then over here, we're doing the one where we actually have a type specified. This is the one that people will actually extend directly. We don't want them extending this one. And maybe even we want to go in here and then write a comment in here saying, do not extend. Now let's go up here and we want to actually override this in the abstract class that we're going to actually be extending when we create a factory, right? So this one, when we call this old function that's in the base, right? What do we want it to do? We want it, well, we just want to call this other one really, because this is just a proxy for this internal one that has an actual type, right? So we're going to go in here. We're going to say return create new. There we go. Now let's do our create object test. Run that again. That should pass. Oh, no, didn't pass. What did we do wrong? We look in here. So we're actually failing on our second test, and that's because I made a typo. See, both of them are running off this one. We want this one to be running off the second one. So that was actually my fault in the tests. So again, if you know exactly what's wrong with the test and you're sure you know what's wrong, you can change the test. But only if you're sure you know what's wrong. Don't ever change the test if you can't figure out why the test is wrong. If you couldn't explain to someone why the test is wrong, who doesn't even really know programming necessarily, you may not know why the test is actually wrong. So let's go ahead and run that again. Run test, and okay, we get a pass. Let's run everything, and we still get the fail on the reuse because, well, we haven't coded it yet, right? So we come in here, and this object clean reuse, we're gonna basically just do the same thing. You know, this, I know this sounds really simple, and I've used up a bunch of the episode already for it, but dems the brakes sometimes. You know, sometimes you do things that seem really, really simple, but you know, you gotta. So what we're gonna do here is we're just gonna assume it's the right thing. And we're just going to cast it, okay? Now, what this will do actually is, and actually, you know, let's not do a cast. We are going to do an as. So we're going to do as t. The reason I'm doing an as instead of a cast is a cast will throw an exception if you use the wrong object, whereas a object as t will just pass in null to the clean for reuse instead, which might be a more desirable thing. I'm not sure if we test in the regular factories thing whether we do that. Okay, so I've wrote a sticky note that says check cache for null behavior, because I don't think that I actually wrote a test for that, if I remember correctly. So we want to make sure that we don't actually add null into our cache, because then at some point in the future, we're going to be trying to get a new object and we're just going to randomly get null, and we'll have no clue why that's going on, right? But if we write a test now, we're going to be able to find that, right? I'm going to come back to that when we get into writing that portion of the program. Right now, we're focusing on this though. So we've got to return clean for reuse, and then we're going to do an object as t, so that if it's not an object that is castable into the object type that this factory was initiated with, then something's gone really wrong. But at that point, we're going to not actually just explode. We just won't fully clean the object properly. Or do we want to explode? We may want to explode, actually. You know what? Yeah, we do want to explode if that happens. Because if the object we pass in is not the right type, then we do want to explode, because that's a really big problem that can cause really big problems down the road. So we want to crash really loud when that happens, so that we know there is something up in the program, right? So we know, oh, whoa, we really messed something up if we're in that situation. Yeah, I want to do that. So I don't actually reflect this in the tests yet. So we're going to want to go ahead and write a test for this scenario. So this is where it goes and it says, if it's not the right object, it should crash really loud, right? So first thing we have to do is this test should pass now. Okay, so now we're going to go and we're going to take this clean for reuse base test. We're going to copy it, and then clean for reuse base explode. Okay, and then we want to grab, well, probably doesn't really matter which one, but yeah, we want to grab something, right? And then in here we want to have a, what is the exception? It's a cast exception, invalid cast exception. So we want to expect an invalid cast exception from both of these when we go and we pass in the wrong object, right? Because we're going to be passing into one of them the object from the other one. So we're passing into factory 1 the object that was used to create factory 2, and we're passing into factory 2 the object that was used to create factory 1, right? Yes, yeah. So those are the object types that are in those factories. And so this would normally throw an invalid cast exception. However, we are expecting that invalid cast exception. So it should just propagate up and the test should fail, or should pass rather. And we run it one more time. Okay, and it passed it. Now, technically speaking, since we are doing test-driven development, we do want to make a fail. Personally, I don't really care if it fails first and then succeeds second. I don't care. What I care about is seeing it do both. So we're going to do an as t, because that we know is going to give null, right, in that situation. So we want to see it fail, which it should. See, because we're getting a null object back and we're not having that exception happen at all, right? So instead, we want to go back to this t, and then we're going to run it again, and we should be all green. Okay, cool. So that finishes the first section of this tutorial. I'm probably going to break it up into 2 episodes, and then we'll cover the next portion, next, in the next episode. And then that way we can go and do the factory tests after we do the object factory tests.